Welcome to the Resilient Butterfly Podcast. My goal is to share inspiring stories of healing and recovery through many diverse approaches and models. Our guests bring incredible lived experiences, insights, and/or professional expertise, each with their own unique path. While we highlight and celebrate these stories, our intention is to inform, inspire, and demonstrate resilience and creativity. This podcast does not endorse any one approach. We believe there is more than one way to heal, and we're here to showcase the resilience and possibilities that exist. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Resilient Butterfly. I am so happy to be on today with Jonathan Kemp, who is from the UK. He's actually in the UK presently. He was born there. He has a remarkable story starting at birth. He was born into privilege. I can't even say the word because I don't even know what privilege is, but and the future third Viscount Rockdale. Could I say that? Did I say that the right?
Close.
So what is before I go on, what is a Viscount Rockdale?
Okay, so it's a strange system that we have in the United Kingdom, and I think some other European countries. We have like honorary titles. So, in the old days, it was things like, dukes, earls, and Viscount is one of these titles. And probably the most common title you'll hear in the UK is Lord.
Mm.
And there are two types of lords. There's one that they call hereditary, which is what I am.
Mm-hmm.
So it was my great-grandfather who was made a baron, which is a lord, for services to the country, both political and military. And what happens is if it's a hereditary title, it gets passed down to the eldest son. And then my grandfather, as it happens, was also given a title. In addition to being a lord, he was made a viscount, which I think is in the pecking order, I think a little bit above. But it's all the same sort of thing. And again, that was a hereditary title, so it was passed down to his son and then down to me. And they still give people these titles, but now the titles none of them are hereditary. So it's just for a lifetime. And predominantly the titles will be Lord or Sir or Lady. They don't.
And it started to know a little bit of the history. It started when someone was a landowner, a baron. Is that? Yeah.
Yes. So, it started like in the UK, it started years ago. Sort of, I don't know, in the Viking times.
Fascinating history. And as I was reading your book, which is Finding Peace of Mind, you went through that history, which actually was great because it led up to really gave the foundation of where you came from and what you had to sort of endure, not even sort of, but endure in as some of your challenges that you had mentally and emotionally as a result of being in this family generationally, and then but not being accepted in that. And instead, you've had tremendous turmoil and pain, and throughout your childhood, your school, you went to very privileged boarding schools, and as a result, then you found a way to go to Australia, became, you were using your hands, and then became on the police force. And then ultimately you were diagnosed with dyslexia and bipolar at the age of 39. So I've shortened, really condensed this, but this is what Finding Peace of Mind in this book that Jonathan has put together, showing the history and what he endured, as well as then writing and putting together his and I'm blanking on it, your program, Smart Wisdom, that you started using yourself because of dyslexia. So, what are the common invasive, the battles that invisible battles that people with mental illness and or dyslexia or other learning disorders, what are some of the invisible battles that you found yourself in and you see others are as well?
Before I answer, are you able to hear some talking in the background?
No, no talking.
No.
No.
Okay, brilliant. Because someone's talking in the background and I can hear it. I wasn't sure if you could.
Mm-mm.
Okay, brilliant. So, yes. I mean, the first thing is you're quite right. I had a very privileged upbringing. The expectation was that, I'd go to a top boarding schools, probably Eton, possibly go to Oxford, Cambridge, then maybe go into the military or possibly a career in the city. And at some point, I would have a seat in the House of Lords, there's two parts of the English government. There's the House of Commons, which is the government of the day, and the opposition, and then the House of Lords, who review the legislation that comes through the Commons and make sort of suggestions for improvement. And and one day I'd sit in the House of Lords and, I would be of service to, the area that I lived in, which was up in the north, and to my country. And the mindset that my grandfather had was very much, it was no fault of his. It was because of when he was born, where he was born, and, his family was very much a Victorian mindset. And then the confusing bit is that things like talking about money was vulgar. And so although we had quite a bit of money, talking about it was vulgar. And working just for money was vulgar too.
Working for money was vulgar. So
if that was your sole motive.
Got it.
So if I was like in a banker in the city and all I was interested in was, making lots of money, large bonuses, then that would be considered inappropriate. So that's sort of what the trajectory was supposed to be. And in reality, probably by the age of 6 or 7, I knew that there was something wrong. So you're asking me about the hidden battles. And I think if one has a mental health illness, I equate a mental health illness as no different to a physical illness. Right. It's a part of the body that isn't functioning as it should be. So
can't cut our head off from our body, right?
Exactly. And, there are various types of mental illnesses. And in the last 30, 40 years, because of our understanding of, psychology, our understanding of cognitive neuroscience, of how the brain works, we're now able to identify illnesses that we weren't able to recognize before, and we just lumped them all together. So one of the hidden challenges is that you probably, well, in my case, very early on, I knew there was something different and I knew there was something wrong, but I didn't know what it was. And
let me go back a little bit and ask this.
Sure.
What are some of the things that you felt, but you didn't know what it was, but you felt that there was something wrong? What are some of those things that come to mind?
Sure. So I felt ill at ease a lot of the time. So I didn't feel comfortable within my own skin. And I kept thinking, if I'd been born to a different family or if I'd lived in a different place, then it would all be different. And I externalized what I was feeling to try and make sense of it. So it was something to do with my family, or it's something to do with where I live or where I went to school. So I felt this sort of continual sense of dis-ease. And it, sometimes it was worse than others. And at times I'd feel that my brain was scrambled. So it was, it was just difficult to function easily. I also felt difficult to connect with other people. And at times I felt that isolated. I felt that, I wasn't making friends. Whether other people saw this looking in, I'm not sure. And yeah, I felt disconnected. But that sense of sort of dis-ease and foreboding, as I got older, got worse.
Yeah, and what I saw that when you went off to Oxford, right? You went to Oxford or no?
That was the game plan.
That was a game plan. Okay.
Yeah.
Where did you
So
end up going then?
I ended up working on building sites. So actually, so the other thing, so I wasn't diagnosed with bipolar and depression until my late 30s, early 40s. And I refused to get help.
Did anyone encourage you to get help, or they just left you alone in the state of being that you were?
That's a good question. I don't remember. I certainly remember towards the end, one of my relatives saying, they thought I was suffering from depression and I should get help.
Because I asked that question because there are so many people out there that are going through this, and even alcoholism or drug addiction, and no one says, "Hey, you need some help." So they just keep suffering, thinking, "I just have to figure this out myself." And the listeners here, if you could put some perspective for others to hear this, that what was, and I know I'm fast forwarding a little bit, but what was the catalyst that at the late 30s that you were able to get some help?
So my catalyst, which I don't particularly recommend, was I'd reached a fork in the road, and I'd been at this fork in the road, probably this type of fork, maybe 4, 5, possibly 6 times in my life up to that point. Basically, I was either going to call it a day and finish things, or I was going to do something different. And different for me was getting professional medical help, although I didn't quite see it as clearly as that. And in my own mind, I tried everything, different jobs, making money, living in other countries. I tried religion, 12-step programs, radical diets, radical exercise regimes. And I'd run out of things to try. And for me, it seems like actually the first obvious port of call would be a medical professional, whether it's a mental health professional or a doctor, psychiatrist, therapist. Mm-hmm. And now I would certainly see that as, if things aren't right mentally, or if you're struggling, or if you sense that actually I'm doing things I don't really want to do, mm-hmm. then I think the most logical place or point of call is a medical professional who can give you unbiased opinion. But the reason for me, that was the last port of call. And I mean, I was in a desperate state because I was willing to call it a day. Mm. And it took that for me to seek medical help. Because for me, I saw seeing a doctor, seeing a therapist was even worse because that was some weird thing from America, California possibly. Seeing a psychiatrist, well, that was for people who are mad, who are nutters. And when you're in a nut house, for me to do that meant that I'd failed. I'd failed to sort this thing out myself.
And I'm sure that there are so many others, and the majority of people, that's how they feel as well. That's the lack of
Yes.
support, right?
Yes. And I think the reasons for that, a lot of the reasons for that are sort of historical and cultural, because the understanding of the brain is relatively new. It's the last sort of 40 or so years. So prior to that, the range of treatments were few, the knowledge was scant, the medication was, again, is relatively new. So we're coming out of an age where people didn't really understand what mental health was. We'd been through 2 world wars, so people thought, well, if you've got a problem, just pull yourself together, because that's what huge numbers of soldiers had to do in the First and Second World War, because that there wasn't any sort of easily found help. And so that sort of thinking and lack of knowledge sort of continued on into my generation, and I think it's starting to change now substantially. And I think COVID, if there was 1 or 2 positives out of COVID, it's accelerated that process. The combination of COVID, which was a global affair, plus social media, which meant that people could talk to anybody anywhere, has really increased the awareness of both mental health, which includes things like stress, anxiety, depression, in my case, bipolar type 2. And also it's increased the understanding of neurodiversity,
Sure.
Which includes, in my case, I have dyslexia, but it could be dyspraxia, which is, having problems with numbers. It could be autism, where, you have difficulty maybe socializing or difficulty just living day by day. So there are many different variants. And I think COVID helped in the sense that it put pressure on everybody globally, and we couldn't escape because we were on our own. And the only way of communicating was this relatively new methodology, which was social media. So that meant that the knowledge and ideas was being shared globally and fast.
I know, I don't remember the year, but you originally, at some point, came to the U.S. for a month-long treatment.
Yes, I did.
And that started somewhat of your insight as to what you were going through, right?
Yes, definitely. So I started off seeing a therapist in the UK who said I was clinically depressed, and I said, no, I'm not. Then I saw another therapist who said, you are clinically depressed, and I said, no, I'm not. And I saw that person for about a year. They then persuaded me to see a psychiatrist who said I was clinically depressed, and I said, no, I'm not. And they got me to track my moods. And because I'm highly analytical and I'm very process driven, I did exactly that for a year and produced a really nice graph. And I could see beyond any shadow of doubt at the end of that, I had a problem. But because this problem had become like norm for me, I couldn't see anything else. So when they said you're clinically depressed, for me, what I was living through was just normal, as it were. And after a year of seeing a psychiatrist, filled out this graph, they persuaded me to start taking medication, and I took an antidepressant. For people with, and this is slightly technical, but for people with bipolar, just taking an antidepressant, if you haven't been diagnosed with bipolar, so at that point I was diagnosed with clinical depression, not bipolar, but just taking an antidepressant can be potentially problematic because it can increase the hypomania or the mania.
Mm-hmm.
I think that did happen with me to a certain extent. And then after about a year, I had another bipolar crash. And again, I was at my wit's end. You know, I was at another fork in the road. And a few of my friends had been to the States, and they said that the reason they went there is because the thinking was ahead of the UK at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And the facilities were really good. And I'd seen them, you know, go off and come back, and I could see the changes. And I thought, right, I'm going to do this. And I took out a bank loan and I went. On the first day of being there, I was assessed by the psychiatrist, who actually then straight away assessed me with bipolar.
Mm.
I'd never heard of it.
Shown him your graph that you had made, or how did he make that assessment at the very start?
That's a good point. I've got a feeling I did take the graph, actually.
That was that was actually amazing that you would do that. So that's one of the tools that somebody could do to really assess for themselves, being able to give that to a psychiatrist or therapist.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, that's something, you know, any of us, like if we think we're suffering from particularly, you know, depression or bipolar, stress, anxiety, to do a simple graph, you know, 0 is struggling, 10 is like everything's going really well, maybe a bit too well, and then 5 is just the sort of calm middle.
And that's
now,
what
ideally,
you're trying to achieve.
yeah, and so we're always looking for that calm middle, and we may fluctuate along it. But if one's depressed, you know, you'll be scoring, instead of scoring 4, 5, you'll be scoring like 1, 2. You know, it's a struggle to get out of bed. It's a struggle to get dressed. It's a struggle to go to work. It's a struggle to concentrate. You know, everything's sort of like gray. Everything's tedious. Probably everything's wrong with everyone except for me. And, you know, I'll be scoring like sometimes I'll be bouncing on the bottom 1, 2, 1, 2. And same if I'm highly anxious or I'm highly stressed. And then sometimes I would come up to a 5, float around a little bit, go down, and then sometimes I rocket right up to like 9 or 10, stay there for a few days and then crash. So if one can, and it's something one could do straight away, is just monitor one's mood in a simple mood chart, do it for like 3, 4 months. And that will give you an insight which you can then share with a doctor or psychiatrist, which is what I'm pretty sure I took it. Whether I showed it to them or not, I can't remember. But I spoke to him for about maybe an hour and a half, and he was asking me lots of questions, and I think I had to fill in a number of different forms. And it was on the basis of the questionnaires and his questioning of me and the answers I gave, he gave me that diagnosis. But it didn't really mean anything to me at the time because I'd never heard of it.
Have you never heard of it? Oh, wow.
No.
Yeah, if without knowing something about bipolar, it becomes like another label. It doesn't really hit you in what that really does. So that was how many years before you actually, at the age of, you weren't 39. Were you 39?
I was 42, I think, 41.
Okay. So you didn't believe you had depression. You didn't really land with bipolar disorder.
Once I started taking antidepressants, after about 3 or 4 months, my brain cleared. And then I went, oh, I have been suffering from depression. Because I hadn't known this sort of like quiet, peaceful brain. It was like, wow. And then I thought, oh, I feel like swearing, but I'm going to resist doing it. I thought, oh my goodness.
You felt so much better, I would imagine.
Yeah, and then I knew I could. Then I had a comparison, and then yes, I had no doubt I I'd been suffering from severe depression.
So you tried and you talked about going to 12-step programs. You recognized very early, based on what I read in your book, early on in your teens or 20s, that your alcohol use was actually a deterrent for you being able to be stable. You were able to listen to other friends say, you're just a bad actor when it comes to alcohol, and able to listen to that and go through the 12-step program. So you were a self-learner, I would say, for many years.
Yes. Um, so I came across 12-step fellowships, of which Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, probably Gamblers Anonymous are the most well known. I came across those quite soon after I left school, so about 19 before I left. And then at 19, 20, I left for Australia and I worked as a cowboy in the outback for a year, where I was drinking and taking other substances. And by the time I came back, I knew that, for me, how I sort of pictured it, I knew that the sort of line between sanity and insanity for me was like finer than a piece of hair.
Mm.
And I knew that if I crossed that, which I would sometimes do if I took drink or other substances, I'd either feel really ill or I'd end up doing stuff that I didn't particularly want to do and getting in situations I didn't want to be in. And so I think I was very, very fortunate. The fact that I had been in 12-step fellowships, I recognized immediately what people were saying and their sort of thinking patterns. And so, when I was trying to proactively sort myself out, which started actually more or less when I left school, certainly by the time I got to Australia, part of that self sort of advocacy was, I've got to stop drinking and taking stuff.
Mm-hmm. So when you
And 12-step fellowships were really very, very good, very helpful. I made lots of good friends, who are still friends now, 40 years on. But addiction is sort of one
mm-hmm.
mental illness or addictive type personality. So I was lucky. I didn't hit they have an expression of going down in an elevator. You can get off at any floor. You don't have to hit the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
So I was lucky. I got off quite a long time before I hit the bottom. And I thought if I sort of worked, Alcoholics Anonymous is it's all run by volunteers. There are some paid workers in the head office, but all the groups around the country are run by volunteers, and they are all suffering addicts. And
around the world, actually, not just the country, but around the world.
yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And there's a suggested spiritual program of recovery, and you can take what you like and leave the rest. So it's very, very flexible. And I had a belief that if I worked the program really, really, really meticulously, which is exactly what I did, that then all this other turmoil inside my head would be sorted out. Mm. And there were moments where it was, but then the black clouds would come back in again. And I think that was probably another reason why I waited so long to get professional help as well, because, I had this, really sort of deep belief that I had to do it myself.
How much of your social background, your how you were raised played into that part too? That I would imagine, coming from a family background that you came from, there was expectation to be perfect and not have any of this stuff going on with yourself.
Yes. So at school, my behavior was not the best. And my parents were called to the school, both schools I went to. Certainly once at each school, maybe twice at each school. And I'd promised to, behave and do A, B, and C. And then within a few weeks, I couldn't resist it. And I'd be back in trouble again. But now looking back, a lot of that, I think, was connected with mental health. A lot of it was connected also with having dyslexia, because with dyslexia, what happens is affects people slightly differently. So it affects the way you process information in your brain. Mm-hmm. And if you're reading it, sometimes, again, it will vary between people, but, you'll have difficulty reading the words, or the words will move around, or you'll jump lines. But when you finish a page, you've got no idea what you've read. And you have problems with writing, and you have another problem I have is the sort of listening. So I find it very difficult to take in information when I'm listening, and it's almost like it's being overwritten. So things like taking directions from people, I put my hands up. I am absolutely hopeless. And I now associate that with the dyslexia. So with the studies, I was absolutely certain that I was stupid, and I couldn't do, any of the sort of successful studies other people were doing. So in the end, I thought, sod it. If I can't be the best, I'm not going to hang around in the middle. I might as well do nothing. So that's what I did.
I want to bring up smart wisdom and what you created with that. Tell me how that even came about. And it's a note-taking ability to take notes differently so that you are able to absorb, remember, etc. Can you explain that? Because there's so...
Yeah, sure. So that sort of started after I came back from Australia. I was a police officer for 12 years in London.
You followed orders very well there.
Sorry?
I said I would imagine you'd have to follow orders very well there.
Well, funny you should say that. So the reason I joined the police was to try and sort myself out. So rather than fighting, everything, was to follow orders and really try my best. And part of that was also try my best on the police exams. So there were we called them probationary exams that you had to take at the end of 2 years, which you needed to pass. And then I immediately sat my sergeant's exams afterwards. And for the first time ever, and I studied really hard. I mean, I really, really tried. And I got a distinction on my constable exams, and I came in the top 100, I think, of the sergeant's exams. But what I discovered on the sergeant's exams, rather than just trying to learn things, I set myself questions and answers. So I'd read a paragraph and I'd see what key facts are, and then I'd ask 2 or 3 questions. And by doing that, I was proactively processing the information, which helped me understand it and helped me remember it. And the reason I left the police, or one of the reasons, was because I wanted to go to university. I'd left school, very poor results, worked on building sites, then went and worked as a cowboy for a year. While all my contemporaries, and you were asking what are the expectations, of someone from my background, the expectation was I would have gone to university, but I didn't. Mm-hmm. Whereas most of my contemporaries did. And so I left the police in my early 30s, and I did a postgraduate diploma in management studies, and then I did a master's degree in international finance, trade and shipping.
Wow.
And they were both really tough. But I knew that if I studied the way I did at school, there was no chance. And at this stage, I had no idea I had dyslexia, no idea at all. So I wasn't diagnosed with dyslexia for another 15 years.
Wow.
And so what I did was I learned some new note-taking techniques. And in the UK, we call them mapping techniques, where you link ideas together. And So I started off with some other techniques, and I had no idea if they would work. I wouldn't know for a year because the exams were a year later.
Mm-hmm.
But with anything that I do, I sort of went all in.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized the technique worked well, but there needed to be some modifications. And so that's what I did. And then the technique evolved into what I call smart wisdom, and which is what I've been training people, both at universities and in corporates here in the City of London.
Very nice. And I know that you're giving away an online program for learning smart wisdom for anyone who buys your book. But before we go into some of this in regard to the book, I want to bring out, I know that there are many mechanisms, both medical and non-medical, that you have used for your diagnosis. Whether you knew the diagnosis or didn't, eventually now that you know the diagnosis, you're using a lot more medical mechanisms. Can you talk to the listeners in regard to your experience with both non-medical and medical?
Certainly. So COVID actually is probably a good example of non-medical and medical. So I've been on the same medication now when COVID hit for about nearly 20 years. And it had stopped working. Mm. And it had probably stopped working about 5 to 8 years before that. Mm. But there was no way I was going to change because, it was quite a rocky road getting on the medication in the first place. And so during COVID, what I'm about to say, I'm saying with the benefit of hindsight. So during COVID, I went back to sort of doing what I was doing, before I sought professional medical help. So I was trying to do everything myself. And the medication had stopped working. And I would wake up most mornings and it was just a struggle and an effort. And it was, just getting out of bed was an effort. Working was an effort. I'd have this continual sort of storm going on inside my head and a sort of just a bleakness. But I knew if I got up, and I was getting up about 6:30 in the morning, if I started work at 7:30, I wrote a list of things to do. I started with the easiest, quickest, or most interesting. And if I stuck with that, sometime between 12 to 2 o'clock, my brain might start to clear. Mm. And I was doing that day in and day out. And it was just completely debilitating. And then in addition to that, I also had 3 or 4 bipolar highs and crashes. So I had a bipolar high and crash just before COVID. Mm. And the highs for me, strangely enough, last a long time. Like the one just before COVID lasted about 6 months.
Oh, wow.
And I started a new business idea, borrowed lots of money. Of course, it was going to be an enormous success. I was doing more and more and more. And then the stress became so much around the Christmas time, I crashed. Mm. And with bipolar, so I have bipolar type 2. When you crash, so I will crash within 24 hours and I'll go from right up here and I can see it coming. And when I crash, it's brutal. It's like my brain. And so this is without medication or with medication that's not working well. And when I crash, it's like my brain has been removed and there's like a sandstorm whirling inside my brain, eating out my skull. And it's relentless. And I know it will never, ever end. And that will last, with the benefit of hindsight, between sort of 2 to 4 weeks. And then after 6 weeks, things will start to clear. But what I used to clear was like a laser focus on my work. And so what I didn't realize was I was then setting myself up for another spike, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So what does medication do? Well, at the end of COVID, I reached another fork in the road. And I mean, I think I was the closest I've ever been to really calling it a day. And funny enough, I couldn't think what to do. My brain was in an appalling state. And I remembered I'd started writing an action plan for my book. And I thought, I know, I'll read. And I couldn't remember what I put in it.
Mm-hmm.
So I dug it out on my laptop and I read it. And step one was to be open-minded and willing. Even reading that, I winced. It's just like, oh God. You know, for me, open-minded and willing is very closely connected with like failure, with, you know, not being strong enough.
Mm.
Number two was to
Is that
seek
perfectionism in that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, perfectionism for me has been a huge issue
Mm.
With anything I touch. And then number two was to seek professional medical help, which bizarrely during COVID, I didn't. I don't know. And I was going through like hell, and I don't know why, but I didn't. And number three was to do whatever I was told. So I thought, right, I'm going to do exactly what it, you know, 1, 2, and 3. And that's what I did. I changed medications. I was lucky. My doctor referred me to a psychiatrist. I saw a psychiatrist really quickly. She said she strongly recommended I take new medication. So I came off my old, went on to new. Again, I had quite a rocky road, and it was rather touch or go for about 3 or 4 weeks. But she got the medications right. She got the dosage right. And by about August, so probably 10, 12 weeks after starting to take medication, this is what it's like for me with the right medication. It was like a miracle.
Mm.
It wasn't an effort to think, wasn't an effort to breathe. It wasn't an effort to get up. It wasn't an effort to walk. You know, I could walk down the street and I could focus on my breathing. I could feel the sun on my arms.
Wow.
And I could just, you know, I could smile at people, and it just wasn't an effort. It felt like an absolute miracle.
And over a period of time, or was this, did it all immediately kick in at some point that all of a sudden you felt clearer?
I would say, I think I sort of changed my medication around, or started to around April. It got really tricky around June. I then was given a second medication around July, I think it was. And then by mid to late August, the changes happened.
Mm.
So it was over a sort of almost, 6-month period.
There are many people that don't wait, and you know, it took you a long time to accept help and want help and go for the help. But there are many people that start something and don't feel well right away and just stop immediately. So to have this very distinct period of time, that you knowing that it takes time for the medication to be accurately prescribed for you, because everyone's different, right?
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely.
Every
Yeah.
person is going to have a little bit of different medication, a little bit of different dosages. To stick it out and have the support around you. I know you had friends that were very concerned about you or looking in on you. That's all part of all of this as well, is knowing that you have people behind you rooting for you as well.
Yeah. So I had friends who were, you know, would be sending me messages on WhatsApp or other, you know, messenger. I had people, sort of phoning me up. And all that did make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Absolutely, it made a difference. And then the other thing that happens, so I think for me, what medication does for me, and you're completely right, I think one has to trust the doctor and the psychiatrist that they know what they're doing. And if you feel that it doesn't sound right, it's to try and get a second opinion. But what I'd recommend is actually sticking with what they do, letting them know what's happening, letting them know what the effects are. And to the best of your ability is to stick with them and keep a sort of open dialogue. Because certainly for me, I mean, probably on both experiences, it took about 6 months for things to settle. Yeah. So one has to sort of, well, one doesn't have to, but I know for myself that I needed to be patient and I needed to trust. And to give you an idea, the therapist, he didn't tell me this at the time, but afterwards he said he was really worried about me and really hoped the psychiatrist knew what they were doing, because the first medication I had, you know, for a lot of people, it's absolutely fantastic. And for me, it just like, yeah, it took me right to the edge. But interestingly enough, I'm still on that medication on the same dose. They then added a second medication. That's the thing that sort of brought the magic.
Sure. Well, the other thing is that so many people, I understand, feel better too. And I'm like, and then they say, "Oh, I'm over this. I don't need this medication. This just got me over the hump." So they stop their medication. And that's when, of course, there's a fall, a drop in whatever, depression, mania, whatever may be going on, and having that stability all the way through is so important. I found your book to be really refreshing to be able to explain what you were like as a boy, what are some of the things that you were able to express all through the different careers that you chose, why you chose them, that everything that you were attempting to do, and then finally getting the diagnosis and getting the medication to have that ability to feel life, to really, as you say, breathe, feel the sun on your arms. That's incredible. So
It's a miracle. Yeah.
I really would love for people, if they want to know more about bipolar or other disorders. This specifically, you're talking about dyslexia, how to overcome some of this, as well as bipolar depression. This book, Finding Peace of Mind, is I hope that is one of the best sellers for you, Jonathan, that's for the world, because more and more people that are suffering from this disease, and it is not something to be ashamed of. You were born with this. You know, this is something that this is who you are, and finding a way to manage your life is, as you say, is a miracle. And I want to commend you for where you are at, what your life is, and you've had a very interesting, very fulfilling life, some of which has been very hard for you, I'm sure. And I,
Yeah, there's one thing that I would say, which you brought up, which is really important, particularly with people with bipolar, is when they feel well, they think, oh, I don't need the medication anymore.
Mm.
And almost without doubt, because bipolar for most people is a lifelong illness, and the effect of stopping the medication means you just go back to square one. And so, from my experience, when you feel well, just carry on doing exactly what you're doing, taking whatever you've been taking to get to that point. And then in terms of the book, there's a couple of things. One is that I decided, in order to sort of keep my motivation clean, as it were, that all profits from the book will be going to 4 mental health charities for the first year post-publication. And because I talk about smart wisdom a lot, because it had a sort of huge benefit for me, I didn't want people to think I was angling for some business there. And because I know it really helps people, who find difficulty concentrating or listening. So what I've done is I've given the online course away for free for anybody who buys the book. And then the third thing I'm doing is I'm going to be doing a 7-month walk and talk, starting in the north of Scotland and then finishing in the south of Ireland, starting January next year, 1st of January next year. And again, I'll be raising money for 4 mental health charities.
Oh, that's fantastic. Wow. Well, I hope you keep emailing me some updates.
Yes, I will, definitely.
Have each other's email now, and I would love to hear about this. And the book is going to be launched, or has it been launched?
It's going to be launched on the 10th of October. And if anybody wants to follow the walk, I should have a website live by then, which will be jonathankemp.com.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing all of your life story, your wisdom, and I wish you all just such a peace of mind in your life. Thank you.
I really appreciate that. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for joining the conversation today. If you are seeking help for yourself or a loved one, please reach out to our Feinberg Consulting team at 248-538-5425. That's 248-538-5425, and check out our website at feinbergcare.com. I'm grateful for our guests and all who have joined us today. Make sure you follow us on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere you listen to podcasts.